This is the 6th part of this manhwa. If you haven't seen the previous chapters, I recommend that you do so. Days later, the first council meeting of the newly founded Busan Union begins. During this meeting, the leaders from each district gather to discuss matters relevant to the ship, regardless of their status. It's also mentioned that the council elected a new captain and established a police department to enhance the ship's security. All the harpooners were categorized within the military, tasked with fighting external enemies like sea monsters. Here, we see Kana addressing a group of new recruits, announcing that after 5 months of intense training, they are now officially harpooners. Their duty is to protect the people from sea monsters, even if it means risking their lives to do so. 2 harpooners nervously observe one of their fellow recruits and realize he is the protagonist. They can't believe that the Leviathan hunter is in their unit, especially since he doesn't seem so special. Kana continues her speech, stating that they are humanity's last defense for safety. Even though their duties are heavy, fulfilling them will bring honor, and they have been reborn as guardians of the Busan Union. She wishes them luck and glory to always be by their side. Later, the protagonist visits a tattoo artist who inscribes the harpooner's emblem on his shoulder. She finishes and mentions that it's traditional to add a red star if one has slain one of the 7 leviathans, asking if he wants one. The protagonist declines, stating he doesn't care about stars since he's just starting his journey. This makes Kana proud as she waits outside the room. The story tells us that the Busan Union quickly returned to everyday life after the incident with Kentrasi. The ship's market is bustling with life again, and people are eating and working as usual. Noah and Lin are seen crossing out places on a job-seeking list, feeling ignored due to their youth. They worry they might never find a job at this rate. Their last chance is a repair workshop, and despite their fears, they head there. They come across a strange vehicle, recognizing it as a diving beetle, just like the one from their underwater city. Lin approaches the console, wondering if it works, but she sees the system full of errors. The workshop staff must be trying to fix it. A mechanic arrives and warns them not to touch it, but the girl starts fixing the errors. The mechanic is surprised that it's working and asks if Lin did it. She confirms, mentioning they had a similar one where they came from. Noah gets into the cockpit, noticing the pilot's seat is similar, and he activates the lever, making the vehicle hover. Other workers gather, including the workshop's head mechanic, surprised that it's finally moving after 3 years of being inactive. The kids ask if they can work there, and without hesitation, the head mechanic hires them, telling them to never consider going elsewhere. From there, we transition to underwater ruins, where a team retrieves the remains of an old car. The workers on the ship are relieved for another calm day, mentioning it's pleasant to work there without sea monsters. Among them are harpooners who defend them, including the protagonist. One of them is frustrated because he worked hard to become a harpooner but hasn't seen any sea monsters yet. He's told he can go home now, and he expresses his desire to defeat sea monsters and become famous like the protagonist. This reminds him of a similar conversation he had with Kana at the Oasis port. Another harpooner speculates that the absence of monsters might be due to them knowing there's a Leviathan hunter in the Busan Union. He finds it strange, considering he hasn't seen such a peaceful ocean in 20 years. However, the protagonist remembers the harsh truth that there's no ocean without Leviathans, and they are likely in another territory. The scene shifts to Lita diving into the ocean until she reaches the seabed. The girl finds herself amidst a graveyard of sunken ships and wonders where she is. She turns her gaze and sees that the name on one of them is Jenner. Suddenly, a dazzling flash behind her catches her attention. She then notices a red glow shining in the distance, which startles her, and she awakens surprised from her dream. Lita gets up from her bed and finds the protagonist working at his desk, who asks her what's wrong. We see that the monstrous eye on the girl is activated as she walks unsteadily towards an unknown place. The protagonist, concerned, gets on guard and follows her, asking where she's going. He shouts at her to wake up as he catches up to her, but she doesn't pay attention and stops until she reaches one of the exterior railings. She tells the protagonist that it's right there. He asks what she means, so the girl raises her hand and points to a spot in the ocean. We quickly transition to that spot, hundreds of kilometers ahead and downwards, until we arrive at the ship graveyard that Lita saw in her dream, where the Jenner is located. And a little further away, the red flash, which upon approaching, reveals itself to be a sea monster with an egg-like shape, resembling the seed that Narissa found. It's covered in eyes, one of which turns and, despite the distance, locks eyes with Lita, who says that her home is there. From there, we move to the library of the Busan Union, where the librarian tells them that the Jenner was a probe ship that investigated the remains of the Vagabundus in the Pacific Ocean 130 years ago. She shows them a picture in the book of the location where the ship sank. Lita recognizes it as the place she saw in her dreams, so she asks where it is. The elderly woman tells her that it's the Vagabundus crater in the Pacific Ocean. It was formed after the Vagabundus ice meteorite collided with the moon, and its debris fell into the Pacific Ocean. She recounts that scientists from all around the world gathered near the crater to identify what it really was. However, upon approaching, she mentions that there was a massive explosion of unknown cause. This caused all the research vessels to sink right at that spot, and there were no survivors. That was all that was recorded of the incident, and due to the catastrophe that followed, humanity couldn't concern itself with that place anymore. So, the elderly woman finds it strange that a 130-year-old ship appeared in Lita's dream. The girl isn't sure of the reason either, but as she remembers that being, she says she can feel that there's something there. This worries the protagonist, who recalls what his sister said and wonders what it means. The boy tells her it was just a nightmare and that she'll be fine after resting a bit, and she smiles and agrees. Moments later, we see the girl working in the greenhouse, picking apples. The boss tells her she can take the day off, as the protagonist seems very worried about her. Although Lita says she's fine, as she feels comfortable being there. To her, it's like a place from another world. The boss agrees that it's beautiful and says humans need to live on Earth. So, if there's ever land again, they will make it green with the seeds they have there. We see a swarm of bees dancing among the flowers. The boss then shows her the box where the beehive is, and a new queen has been born in the colony. This queen is larger than the other bees. Lita is amazed because she's never seen one before, and then she notices another queen. She's excited, thinking it might be her sister, but suddenly, one of the queens attacks the other with her stinger. Lita gets scared that it's attacking her, but the boss tells her that's the natural instinct of bees. There's no room for another queen, and she's eliminating the competition. The strongest queen takes charge of the colony. The newborn queen finally dies, and Lita reflects that it's too cold that she was destined to die from the moment she was born. Suddenly, a shiver seems to run through her mind, and she's transported to a strange version of the greenhouse. This confuses her, and we see a mound starting to form behind her, which rumbles and begins to rise from the grass. After realizing its presence, the girl turns and sees a humanoid shape forming, seemingly made of blue jelly with pink veins inside. The girl asks who it is, when suddenly the creature finishes forming eyes and a mouth, and it bows in front of her. It starts stuttering, until it tells her that it found her and that she is unique. However, this scares Lita, who yells at the monster to stay away, and with her power, she seems to be able to disintegrate the jelly. This brings her back to the real world, and she sees a mark left on the grass where the creature was. The boss returns running and asks Lita what's wrong and if she's okay. But she doesn't respond, and with a distant gaze, she mentions that it wasn't a dream. Suddenly, the ship's radar detects something approaching, and the officer asks the captain to take a look. He says that there's a ship detected ahead, which turns out to be the Jenner, and Lita, with her activated eye, warns that the monster is on its way. So, she hurries to alert the crew, as she knows that something bad is about to happen. On her way, we see fish crashing against the hull in large numbers, as if they are escaping from something. And Lita says that it's coming. Through his binoculars, the captain watches the approaching ship and asks his communication officer if there has been any message. But the officer says they're not responding. The captain wonders where the ship is coming from when suddenly the officer detects an urgent distress signal. The captain asks if it's coming from the ship, but the officer says no. Then they hear that the transmission is coming from the floating city of New York, which is under attack by the Leviathan Scutum. This surprises the bridge crew. But it doesn't stop there. As soon as that one ends, another distress signal arrives, this time from Akroma, who are under attack by the Leviathan Basra. Suddenly, transmissions start coming in from all known human settlements, reporting attacks by sea monsters, from the commercial port and the Notre Dame Union to the Oasis port. The captain realizes that the largest human bases were attacked simultaneously by each of the 7 sea demons. Then he turns his attention towards the Jenner and realizes that it's also an attack. The captain orders his helmsman to change the ship's course to starboard to get as far away from the Jenner as possible. The officer obeys, and the Busan Union makes a sharp turn, causing passengers to ask what's happening. However, the Jenner also changes its course immediately, aiming directly towards them. The captain grabs the radio and orders the ship to alter its course immediately, but no matter how much he insists, there's no response, and the ship doesn't stop. until the tip impacts against the hull of the city ship and pierces through to the interior, causing the hit to destabilize everyone standing. Immediately, the damage starts causing water to flood the decks. From above, Lita sees that the impact is causing the Busan Union to begin collapsing. People in distant sections wonder what's happening and what that sound was. Suddenly, they feel their feet getting wet, and they see seawater flooding the floor. Meanwhile, those in the flooded area are the first to experience the inundation and are swept away by the incoming water. Some manage to escape and climb the stairs, but they soon realize that at that rate, they'll end up submerged. So, everyone tries to evacuate as quickly as they can. The captain requests a damage report, and the officer informs him that sections C4 and C3 are completely flooded, while B3 and B5 are filling up rapidly. The captain orders the evacuation of civilians and to secure the affected sections. The crew obeys, evacuating as many people as possible before closing the safety doors. These doors are activated to prevent water from progressing into other sections, but in the process, many people end up in the water. They then see a bunch of tentacles slithering through the flooding. The chief of the engine room directs his crew, warning that a lot of water is coming out of the drainage pumps. They must hurry, because if they lose the Busan Union, they'll lose everything. Suddenly, he sees the tentacles emerging from the hull of the old ship. The chief warns that it's a sea monster, ordering everyone to evacuate. Just as the tentacles, which are actually thousands of worms, shoot out from the hull of the ship, to reveal that it's one of the 7 sea demons, named Wormtuka, who quickly launches itself at the people and traps them with a kind of web that the tentacles spit out. This web begins to consume the blood of those it touches. One of the mechanics and the chief continue their escape, managing to reach the other side and close the door. But this isn't enough, as the worms make their way through and reach them within seconds. The chief is about to be devoured when suddenly Kana and the protagonist appear, cutting the worms in half and freeing the chief just in time. He's surprised by their arrival, and the protagonist asks if he's okay. In another section of the ship, the inhabitants start evacuating to the upper floors, while a woman asks if the Busan Union is sinking. Her husband says there's no way that could happen to a ship as big as that. But when their daughter urges her mother to hurry because she's scared, she turns and sees that she's already been devoured by Wormtuka. Its web began to infiltrate through the cracks in the metal, and suddenly the mass of worms follows, breaking through the floor towards the upper floors. People panic and start fleeing, but they are soon overtaken by the worms, until a burst of light pierces through them, and we see that it's Sonya and Brune. This makes the people glad for the arrival of the Harpooners, who inform Kana that they've joined the battle. The girl then orders her troops not to allow anyone else to get hurt. The warriors obey her orders, leaping into the sea of endless worms. They unleash the fury of the Harpooners through the various levels of the Busan Union. Then we shift to what is happening simultaneously in the floating city of New York, where the local Harpooners are fighting against Skudum. In Akroma, where the city is being stalked by a massive monster swimming beneath them. At the commercial port, where the Kraken assaults and destroys the remaining 2 towers. The same is happening in the Notre Dame Union and the Oasis port, where monsters are wreaking havoc. Back in the Busan Union, Sonya's team manages to defeat all the worms that had infiltrated the upper sections, so the residents are relieved that they've come to save them. Brune praises the girl, who says she's a great mercenary. But Brune says they didn't really need much skill to deal with the worms, saying they're weak for being one of the 7 leviathans. This angers Sonya, and she asks if they should just cut them in half. Another one of them asks Kana what she thinks, and the girl believes the battle is over. So, she orders them to move to the next section, but suddenly, the cut worms begin to regenerate. New heads grow from the cuts, so the harpooner warns everyone to be careful. In an instant, they now have twice as many worms to deal with, and they see that from the new mass of flesh, a humanoid and dark figure emerges. The harpooners recognize this as the true Wormtuka. Through its webs, it lifts one of the captured corpses and starts speaking with its mouth, asking where the human queen is. The harpooners are surprised that, for the first time, a sea monster is talking to them, who, through human bodies all over the ship, tells them that it will kill them all until their queen appears. Sonya shouts for it to get lost, as there's no queen there, and she lunges to cut off the main body's head. The harpooners open fire on it too, riddling it with a barrage of projectiles that leave its flesh battered. However, almost instantly, the monster regenerates and launches another wave of worms at them. This makes them wonder if the monster is immortal. The new mass of flesh swiftly moves to strike Brune and Gongti, who counter the blow directly. But the worms cushion the impact by expanding sideways, then overcome their defenses and engulf them along with the girls, leaving all the humans present trapped and suffocating within the massive worms. Immobile and without an escape, Wormtuka ominously stands over them and approaches to devour them with its webs, which it's about to do despite the harpooner's cries. But then something happens that catches the monster's attention and makes it stop. This is a telepathic message summoning the monster, telling it that she's the one it wants. And we see that it's Lita, speaking through her monstrous eye. In the midst of the battle, the protagonist also senses it and recognizes that it's his sister. Wormtuka sees her clearly with its monstrous sight, so it abandons its newly captured prey and speeds toward Lita, taking all its worms with it. Brune is surprised it's gone, but wonders what the hell is going on. And we see that Wormtuka didn't release the harpooners, but kept them trapped in its webs, from which, no matter how hard they try, they can't free themselves. Annoyed, Sonya asks if it's saving them for later. Then the girl in the hull opens it and starts to escape, which Sonya praises as smart. But in doing so, she realizes it's a cute girl with the fish disease. Brune asks if she's allowed to just take it off like that, but the girl pulls out a knife and tells him it's not like they have other options, so she'll free them in a moment. And Sonya calls her a sea monkey, which annoys the girl, who asks if it's the first time she's seen the fish disease. Wormtuka makes its way through the ship until it breaches the hull and returns to the sea, where Lita is waiting for it. Seeing all the worms pouring out of the ship, she tells it to stop torturing people, and they should just come for her. The protagonist and Kana witness the movement of the worms, which no longer seem to care about the other people. And the protagonist worries about his sister, asking her what she plans to do. On the bridge, the crew also notices the sea monster's movement, and we see the massive worms fall until it's in front of Lita, where Wormtuka's main body begins to form. Not far from the scene, Kana and the protagonist rush toward Lita, and he shouts at her not to do it because it's dangerous. The monster finishes rising over the girl, and the captain orders his officer to fire and burn them all. So, flame cannons ignite, and in an instant, they incinerate all the worms in front of them, causing Wormtuka to shriek in pain. The protagonist cries out for his sister, who is still safe, but Wormtuka says it found the queen and, in a single movement, lunges at her with such force that it splits the Jenner in half and disappears into the ocean. This causes the protagonist to panic and jump into the water to follow them. He dives as quickly as he can, and in the depths, he sees the silhouettes of the fight, which leaves him astonished. Because Lita, using her tentacles, engages in a duel with Wormtuka. It's so evenly matched that both inflict wounds on each other at the same rate as they fall into the depths. Through her telepathy, Lita asks the monster why it's attacking them if she doesn't want to fight it. But the monster doesn't respond and manages to immobilize her with one of its tentacles. Then it tells her that the realm can only have one queen. Still hoping for peace, Lita asks it to please leave them alone. And she asks if they can simply coexist, humans on the surface and monsters under the water. To end this struggle, Wormtuka seems to consider it for a moment, but then it says there can only be one queen, and it readies itself to devour the girl. Just as its body is about to close in, the protagonist's sword pierces right through its midsection, distracting it. While the protagonist activates his weapon's gas and shouts that it should keep its hands off his sister. The protagonist uses all his strength to finish off the monster when suddenly a noise catches his attention. He sees that it's the half of the Jenner sinking, heading towards them, and in a matter of moments, it falls onto Wormtuka at great speed, crushing it beneath its remains. Lita manages to escape, worried that the protagonist went with the monster, but he frees himself from the debris, launching himself out as well. He manages to grab onto a concrete column, thinking that all this intense movement is making it difficult for him to hold his breath. Wormtuka shrieks again, indicating that it's still in the fight. So the protagonist activates the gas in his sword and propels himself through the debris. When he turns around, he sees that the monster is following him along the same path, almost catching up. In haste, the protagonist plunges his sword into its stomach, changing direction before Wormtuka's attack can hit him. The protagonist aims for the surface and shoots out of the debris with the monster close behind. Suddenly, Lita falls from above and, in a single strike, pierces through Wormtuka from side to side, telling it that it's enough. With a quick twist, she slices the body into multiple pieces, surprising the protagonist. The monster starts to regenerate, and the protagonist warns his sister about this characteristic of their opponent. But before she can react, she's impaled by Wormtuka's tentacles, which instantly start devouring her before the protagonist's eyes. He watches as her skin begins to dry due to the lack of blood. He rushes to save his sister but is ensnared by a tentacle that pulls him away from her. However, upon closer observation, he realizes that the tentacle belongs to Lita, who appears more powerful than before. When he looks away, he sees that the Lita that Wormtuka trapped was a fake. The girl tells the monster that what it absorbed wasn't her blood, but Jenna's poison, and we see the monster start to glow, then dissolve like acid corroding a piece of meat. Taking advantage of this, the girl attacks its weakened remains before it can regenerate. And now, it's her turn to devour the monster, as she says that if it's going to keep regenerating endlessly, she will consume every last bit of its being. This surprises the protagonist. The small piece of Wormtuka, before disappearing, tells her in its dying breath that the fight isn't over yet, and that its realm will fall, a message it conveys through all the human bodies it controlled. Back on the ship, the head of the engine room shouts at his men that it's not too late, and they must protect the drainage pumps. He sees a man walking towards a lever and tells him to get back to his post. But he's being controlled by the monster, and instead of helping, he pulls the lever for the floodgates, allowing all the water to rush back in and flood the areas they were struggling to drain. This destabilizes the ship and causes that section to start sinking, which Lita and the protagonist realize even while underwater. The pressure on the connectors between sections becomes so great that people begin to realize they're going to break. And before they can do anything, these connectors collapse, completely separating the left section of the Union Busan. Some people who were evacuating through the bridges end up trapped when the bridges start to break. And although they try to help each other to reach the part of the ship that remains stable, the bridges eventually collapse, and dozens of people fall into the water from great heights, just like the residents on the sinking side, who prefer to jump into the ocean rather than be trapped inside the rapidly sinking area. Fortunately, multiple lifeboats are deployed, and the residents manage to take refuge in them. But they watch in horror as people and debris tumble down the incline, and as the ship slowly starts to tilt toward them. Kana, who is still on board, witnesses the scene in astonishment, still unable to believe that the Union Busan is sinking. The massive metal tower is about to fall onto the refugees when suddenly a halo of blue light appears in the water. Enormous tentacles emerge from it and strike the structure. People are frightened because it's a sea monster, and that's when Lita emerges from the depths connected to the tentacles, and rises with them to the height of the ship, where Kana sees her in amazement. The protagonist also surfaces, equally surprised to see his sister, who positions herself in the hole created by the Jenner. People start screaming in fear that it's a monster, which angers the protagonist and saddens the girl, as everyone there is observing her in the same way. So she thinks that once again people will fear her and avoid her, just like they did in the Oasis port. The protagonist mentally asks her to quickly hide her tentacles, but with a smile, his sister tells him that there's no turning back now, because that's the only way to save those people, and she apologizes to him for it. Then she starts releasing her power, recalling what Dr. Foyd told her about the power she possesses as a monster, and she thinks that she'll do what he said, become one to protect the people. A tremendous light emanates from the girl, causing hundreds more tentacles to emerge from her body, and the people are left astonished by the spectacle before their eyes. With all her being, Lita starts closing the opening left by the Jenner. Gradually, her tentacles begin to join and fuse together like a massive web, causing her a lot of pain. But she persists, even though she feels like her body is being torn apart because the ship is too large. She says it's too much for her when suddenly, Wormtuka's remaining worms inside the ship appear, spitting out their silk to help seal the opening alongside the girl. The engine room team cries for help because they're still inside the ship. But then the chief notices that the water level is dropping, and they realize that the worms are drinking the water and spitting it back into the ocean, functioning as extra drainage pumps, and the girl thanks them for it. Then the people who hadn't managed to get out realize that the ship suddenly levels out, and with the radiance of her powers, Lita manages to seal the ship's breach. This leaves everyone stunned and unable to believe what they're seeing, even wondering if she's human, as she appears to them like an angel. They say that what just happened is a miracle and that Lita is a miraculous child. The girl faints due to exhaustion, so the protagonist climbs the organic wall to reach her, but then her body detaches from the wall. As she falls, the protagonist stretches to reach her and manages to hold onto her hand, but due to the weight, both fall back into the ocean, escorted by Wormtuka's worms. Both of them continue to sink, and the protagonist asks the girl in his mind to wake up. The girl opens her eyes and sees her brother, who tells her it's him and asks if she's okay. But instead of answering him, Lita tells him that Wormtuka attacked because he was looking for her, so the Leviathans will keep looking for her until she's dead. The protagonist tells her that he doesn't care and that they can do whatever they want, because that's why he became an harpooner, to protect her with his life so she doesn't have to worry. but she just smiles at him with tears in her eyes and tells him he's very kind, and that's what she liked most about him, the reason she wanted to be with him forever. But she tells him it's time to let her go and starts to let go to fall into the depths. The protagonist tells her no and asks her what she's talking about, because there's no way he's letting her go. But then one of the worms bites his hand and forces him to let go. So, surrounded by the worms, the girl falls. The protagonist still tries to reach her and begs her not to go, but she has no intention of returning. So the protagonist draws his sword and uses the gas to reach her. But after a few seconds, the tank runs empty, and while the girl fades into darkness, the protagonist is left screaming at her and asking her to come back, until he can't see her anymore. Back on the surface, we see Lita's web spanning across the section that almost flooded. The head mechanic says it's not just attached to the steel plates, but fused with them as a single entity. So, if they cut the flesh too hastily, the ship could sink again. The captain finds this terrifying, wondering how a young girl could do all of this. Then we see the protagonist in a room, still unable to process what happened. He told Kana about Lita being the queen that Wormtuka was looking for, and admits he realized his sister was changing slowly, but he decided not to confront the issue. Although he knew the girl had become fragile and vulnerable, so she must have been very scared being alone. But he thought everything would be fine if he acted like nothing had happened. Kana tells the protagonist it's not his fault, as it was a decision Lita made to protect him and the people, and wonders where the girl could be now. At that moment, a police officer informs the captain that everything is ready. So, he stands in front of a microphone and is about to make an announcement to the citizens of Union Busan. He begins by saying that in the past 100 years of their journey, they had never been attacked by a leviathan like what happened that day. And as we see Oasis Port in ruins, he says those wicked monsters will never stop, because they thirst for human blood, and that's why they mustn't suppress their anger. And we see Mao completely furious at seeing the inhabitants' corpses. We also see Akroma engulfed in flames, with people crying at the scene, but also those who are angry about it. The captain says they can't wait to be killed, and he continues his speech as we see each settlement being attacked and warriors ready to strike back. The captain says humanity must unite as one, as they will defend themselves, survive, and show the sea monsters what humans are capable of. So, the people applaud and cheer as we learn that the entire Parliament of Union Busan approved Operation Eliminate, a plan to exterminate the Leviathans. Next, we see the Harpooners gathered, where Gonti asks how they'll find them in the middle of that endless ocean. And the protagonist tells them that Lita saw that their nest was where the Jenner sank, and Wormtuka must have ridden that ship from the graveyard of ships. He shows a black box they recovered from the Jenner and says it should be able to guide them there. Moments later, Lin manages to restore the GPS and determines that the wreck's location is in the Pacific Ocean, near the Emperor Seamounts chain. The protagonist understands that the monsters chasing Lita are there, so with determination, he thinks he'll bring his little sister back home, even if he has to kill all the ocean's leviathans, and he declares that this is war. We see the fleet of survivors from Akroma traveling during the sunset, and the Harpooners inside, where one of them tells the chief that at that rate, it will take 15 days to reach the floating city of New York, to which the chief says it will be a problem since they don't have enough water or fuel, and they wonder if they will arrive safely. As the sun begins to set, the Harpooners make everyone go inside the ships to shelter from the sea monsters. Night finally falls, and the ship shakes under the constant attack of the beasts, while frightened people endure inside. Then, one of the hits is so strong that it dents the hull next to a mother and her son. So the Harpooners appear, and the chief instructs the woman to keep quiet. The Harpooner says it must be a leviathan, although outside we see that it's not. But it's a tide of monsters that assaults the small fleet and starts climbing onto the ships. So people think it's their end and that everyone is going to die. When suddenly, the noise stops. Suddenly, the deck hatch begins to open, so people panic. And the chief tells the Harpooners to prepare for battle. But when the hatch opens, they see that it's Kana, Brune, and the protagonist, who asks if they're okay. Surprised, the Harpooner asks who they are. And in front of the hundreds of monster corpses, the protagonist says they are Harpooners from Union Busan who came to save them after receiving their sauce call. So the people cry tears of happiness, and when the Harpooners come out, they see the massive city ship rising imposingly above their heads. The Harpooner thanks them and says they are the survivors of Akroma, heading to the floating city of New York. And since the protagonist says they're on their way too, he offers to escort them. Here, we are told that Union Notre Dame sank due to the massive monster invasion, just like Akroma, while Oasis Port and Commercial Port were partially destroyed. This resulted in a 30% decrease in the human population in a day. So the survivors decided to gather in the floating city of New York to discuss Operation Exterminate. And we see the fleets of Akroma and Union Busan arriving at the city. They request permission to enter the port, and from the Statue of Liberty, permission is granted and they are welcomed. As we're explained that the city was built in the shape of a cone to withstand the waves, but it doesn't have an engine to move. Additionally, there used to be 3 of these cities, but due to an accident, 2 sank. And New York became the last bastion of humanity. The protagonist is amazed because it's huge, and Sonya tells him it's 6 times larger than Union Busan. The protagonist looks around and is happy to see many harpooneros from all over the world ready to fight against the Leviathans. Then someone shouts that Skudum appeared, so Kana rushes to see. But what she finds is only the corpse of the Leviathan that killed her family, as she remembers the moment they were devoured. And since then, she vowed to work hard to fight against the Leviathans, and that she had hoped to encounter Skudum and take revenge, telling the corpse that its death was hers. She thinks that Tian Ma barely managed to scare him off that time, so she asks who killed him. And Sonya tells her that there's only one person in the city who could kill the 7 demons, and that's Clark Miller, a 6-star harpoonero. He's a legendary hero, and the protagonist realizes that these are the same stars his father had. Clark realizes their presence and walks towards the group of newcomers, so the protagonist introduces himself and extends his hand. But Clark completely ignores him and goes to hug Sonya, expressing his joy that she's back, which makes the girls jealous, and Gongti says they were lovers a long time ago. But this only angers Sonya, who asks him to let go of her, although Clark says he won't because people are watching. And the scared girl wonders why she still feels intimidated by him, like his version from 3 years ago when she was treated like an ornament. However, Brune steps between them and tells Clark it's an honor to meet him. But Clark sees that he only has 3 stars, which disappoints him, and he tells Brune not to get in his way. Clark approaches the girl again and says he's very disappointed in her because she left the city to become a mercenary. But she's been wasting her time with those losers, and he tells her she needs to play with people of her own level, which angers the protagonist and Brune. The girl remains intimidated for a moment, but then tells him it's enough and not to speak ill of her friends, because she can handle whatever he says to her, but he needs to leave them alone. Clark tells her she's still just as rude, but he won't stop her from hanging out with them if that's what she wants. And he would have taken her in if she had returned, but then he sees the protagonist giving him a dirty look and asks him what he wants. The protagonist tells him he doesn't like him and asks who he thinks he is to talk to them like that. But Clark puts his hand on the protagonist's face and says starless harpooneros can't talk to him, which enraged the boy, who removes his hand and tells him his arrogance must be of 8 stars. Clark warns him not to provoke him, but the protagonist continues until he tests the harpoonero's patience, and they exchange a powerful blow that surprises the blonde. People get excited about the fight, and Clark launches a wave of spinning attacks that the protagonist blocks with such strength and skill that Clark wonders if he really is a starless harpoonero. But then Kana appears between them, reminding them that they gathered to fight monsters, not each other. So the embarrassed protagonist apologizes, and the others recognize her as the Leviathan hunter who killed Genod. And after seeing her red star, Clark's attitude completely changes. He apologizes and introduces himself in a friendly manner. He also says she's more beautiful than the rumors, which angers the protagonist. But then Clark mentions they were looking for an harpooner like her and asks if she would like to join their team. With that, they would grant her citizenship and the position of vice commander, which surprises everyone. And Kana says it's a great offer, but declines, saying she doesn't consider offers and conditions when choosing her leader, and she leaves with her group. So Clark's teammate says the girl won't be easily convinced, and the harpoonero mentions he thought Kana was the only one. But it seems there's another headache in Union Busan, referring to the protagonists. The group asks Sonya if she's okay, but the girl is furious for letting herself be intimidated again. To which Gongti responds that she's not useless just because Clark says so, because she was there when Jocko, Oasis Port, and Kana's crew needed help, in addition to helping the protagonist fight against Kentrasi, which makes her a great harpooner, which makes her blush, but then Brune says that doesn't make her magnificent, just good, although they're all friends. Then the night arrives, and we see that Foyd's cell is filled with research papers. Lynn and Noah have been bringing him data they restored from the Jenner. with which the doctor says he can finally unravel the mystery of the Leviathans. Back with Kana and the Protagonist, she heals the wounds that Clark inflicted on her, even though the Protagonist dodged the blows, and she scolds him for going down the lair 3 times and being fooled by Clark's attack twice. So she tells him he needs to strengthen his legs and lose fat because he has become slow. The boy asks her why she's scolding him, and she tells him it's because he's no longer a child and needs to learn to avoid fights. She tries to reach the first aid kit to treat the Protagonist, but he reaches it first and tells her to stop treating him like a child. This puts them very close to each other. Kana starts treating him, but the Protagonist blushes from the physical contact, and he wonders if he should ask her if she remembers the day of the kiss. Then the girl finishes treating him, and their gazes meet. But after looking at her lips, the boy looks away blushing and thanks her. Back with the doctor, he says he needs more data because he still doesn't understand why there was an explosion in the Vagabundus crater. Suddenly, puddles of water appear in the cell, and fish emerge from them. Instead of worrying, Foyd simply tries to shoo them away because he's busy. But one of them insists that he follows, so the doctor does and ends up walking in the ocean, where the fish leads him to what appears to be a gigantic root, an empty pipe inside. But when he touches it, an earthquake happens. Then the fish tugs at his clothes to show him something else. So Foyd follows them to the top of a mound and finds the Leviathan's nest. At that moment, a seed appears in his hands, and the earthquake returns with such force that the doctor understands it's a volcano about to erupt. And he finally deduces that the nest used the tentacles as pipes to pump seawater onto land, and then used artificial earthquakes to trigger volcanic eruptions. In addition to that, whoever is revealing this to him could be Lita or Narissa, although he still doesn't understand the purpose of forcing volcanic eruptions. That's when suddenly the nest explodes, and millions of seeds are ejected from it, in the midst of an explosion comparable to nuclear bombs, until the doctor wakes up alarmed and says he found the final piece of the puzzle. And suddenly we see how all those affected by the fish disease wake up after having the same dream. The next day, the topic is discussed in the International Federation meeting, where the captain of Union Busan informs that there's a Leviathan nest near the Emperor's underwater mountain range. Clark asks how they know, and the captain says it's because Lita was briefly connected to the Queen. But the others doubt this information because of that, saying that Lita might be one of them and could have set a trap for humans. This angers the Protagonist, who says the girl is on their side. But Clark says that's exactly why they can't trust her opinion. Then someone else shouts that Lita is human, and we see that it's the people from Oasis Port. So Kana and the Protagonist are happy to see them. Mao testifies that the people abducted by the Leviathan returned unharmed thanks to Lita, so they can trust her as she's the miracle of Oasis Port. But the people present remain distrustful, so Mao explodes and tears his clothes while shouting at them to learn to trust others, and he stands naked to prove to everyone that he's not infected. However, Clark asks that their personal emotions not cloud their decision-making, as they are playing for the future of humanity. And as they can't trust Union Busan or Oasis Port, he says that New York will take charge of the mission. This means all the Harpooners will be under their command, and they will take the lion's share of the loot. So Gongti tells the Protagonist to observe how even in that moment, people only think about their own benefit. But then Dr. Foyd arrives, laughing at humanity's greed even when they have death in front of them. He tells them that the Leviathans appeared after the explosion 130 years ago, which caused the seeds to spread. While humanity weakened, the Leviathans thrived. And now, there will be a new explosion soon in the nest, bigger than the previous one. It will cause the seeds to spread all over the land and even into space, finding another mother planet. Meanwhile, the ocean seeds will create more sea monsters and cause the Leviathans to take over the earth. So he mocks them all, because their extinction is finally near. But instead of solving the problem, this only created more disputes, and the meeting was suspended. Later, they examined the doctor's research and realized he was right. So, under the premise of unconditional cooperation, the council decided to bomb the nest. Some time later, Kana congratulates Mao for becoming the leader of Oasis Port. But he's not proud, as he couldn't protect anyone in the port after the Leviathan Godric's attack. However, even though they don't have trained harpooners, they're willing to help with divers, who unearthed a bomb from the sunken city of Atlanta. They are disassembling and rebuilding it to turn it into a depth charge. But being very old, they're not sure if it will work correctly, as these were what caused the accident that sank the two cities. Here, the Protagonist remembers that his father used one of them, and their destructive potential, so he's alarmed that they will put so many on Union Busan. At that moment, Clark arrives and says they need more because they must eliminate the nest and all the Leviathans that could become queens, of which there are only 3 left: Basra, who attacked Gordic, who attacked Oasis Port, and Kraken, who attacked Commercial Port. And depending on what happens, they consider targeting Lita as well. This infuriates the protagonist and Mao, and Kana says that if the girl betrays humanity, she'll kill her herself. However, she says that if anyone lays a finger on her, she'll slit that person's throat and tear them to pieces. Clark accepts this, saying he'll be waiting. So the protagonist looks out over the ocean and wonders where his sister is, because he can still feel her, and he thinks he can't imagine how lonely she must be in the ocean. So he asks her to hold on a little longer. Then we see Lita, who recounts that at first, she simply hid in a cave, until she ventured out to get food while evading the Leviathans, and she tried to get used to life in the ocean, which she describes as cold and dark, but also beautiful. She even went out to see the protagonist when she felt very lonely. We witnessed that she saw when her group rescued the people from Akroma, but a child spotted her, so she tried to move as far away as possible, to a place where they couldn't find her and where she could be alone. However, she was also afraid of this, as she wanted to be with Kana and the protagonist. But at the moments she felt most alone, the worms appeared to console her, so she thanked them. Then something enormous emerges from the depths, and the girl sees that it's Godric, one of the 7 sea demons. Upon seeing her, he immediately charges towards her. Instead of succumbing to fear, Lita activates her eye and causes a huge explosion. We then return to the humans, who perform a ritual to protect the ship and people from the Leviathans. And it's the day before the battle, so all the different communities pray to their gods, each in their own ways and beliefs. Among them, the steward gives the protagonist a seagull head amulet that's said to protect from the Leviathans, so he should always carry it with him. With tears in his eyes, he asks them to be careful. Next, the transfer of civilians to the side sections of Union Busan is completed, and only soldiers remain on board. The captain orders the detachment of the main section and announces that Union Busan is ready to depart, as people from different sections bid farewell to their relatives and friends heading to battle. After setting sail, the fleets of Akroma and Benin join the formation of Union Busan. Clark notices this but isn't bothered, saying that New York's combat strength is overwhelming. They have 2 other large ships with them, and he announces that the best rewards will go to those who contribute the most in battle. This motivates his troops, and they set off for the Leviathan Nest, which is in the Pacific Ocean, a place humans haven't gone to in 100 years since they always settled in the ruins of great cities. During the night, the group spots a school of 40 Leviathans passing them by. Inside, Brune and a harpooner play arm wrestling, with the latter winning. Sonya wonders where the protagonist is, and we see that his seagull head amulet is left in Kana's room. Meanwhile, he thinks about how much time is left to reach their destination. A storm seems to be forming in the vicinity of the fleet. As a result, the captain orders to accelerate to get out of its range, but then they start detecting more Leviathans moving in groups. We see that there are a great number of them, swimming just beneath the fleet. However, they don't attack the humans, they seem to be just passing by. Sea Monkeys notes that they are swimming alongside them. The harpooners remain tense in their presence, and thanks to the radar, the captain realizes that they are also heading to the Pacific Ocean, the same nest they are going to. At that moment, Clark also realizes that they are converging. Suddenly, the radar officer alerts that something massive is approaching. The harpooners see that it's a huge tsunami, but not formed by waves, rather by thousands of sea monsters. Clark orders the fleet to accelerate to enter the storm and avoid collision with them. However, the tongue of one of the monsters is severed by the engine of one of the ships. This enraged the rest of the Leviathans, and they start attacking. The first ship affected defends against the monsters, but they soon become overwhelmed by their numbers and sink. Clark states that they will all die if they get caught, so he orders them to focus solely on escaping. But the monster tsunami advances, one by one reaching the rear ships. Another ship is about to be hit, when suddenly Kana and the protagonist appear to aid their allies. Kana covering the protagonist while he rescues those who fell from their ships. However, those he manages to rescue are killed within seconds. At that moment, the wave of beasts reaches the New Jersey, unable to withstand the weight of so many monsters. It is instantly sunk. Yet, it was carrying several depth charges, so the monsters end up biting them, causing a massive explosion. The fleet takes advantage of this to accelerate and enter the storm. Meanwhile, Clark is pleased that things are getting interesting. Here we're told that Clark is the son of John Miller, a great harpooner from New York. Unlike his father, Clark enjoyed dark alleys. They were the perfect place for the boy to satisfy his needs. We see young Clark killing animals with his own hands. John Miller believed his son did it out of curiosity like any child. But his darkness grew too large, and he continued killing until he stabbed a human. his brother. His father told him he couldn't do that, as others would see him as a monster. But the boy just said he would make sure they wouldn't find out. So his father understood that if he left him like that, he would become a killer monster. For a few seconds, he thought about killing him, but instead, he hugged him. He told him that the only beasts he could kill were outside, referring to the sea monsters, and he told him to become a harpooner. Then we return to the present, where Clark sees the monster tsunami and thinks that these are all the beasts he's allowed to kill. Due to the lightning, the captain of Union Busan orders Kana and the protagonist to return. But then a huge wave lifts Clark's ship, which the monsters take advantage of to attack the deck. That's when he charges forward and with clean sweeps of his harpoon, shreds the invading monsters into pieces. The more he kills, the more excited he becomes, to the point of killing an entire row with a single swing. And as he sees the approaching tide, he changes the mode of his harpoon and thinks of his father's words about becoming a harpooner. To him, they meant killing monsters to become a monster. With a single blow, he's able to annihilate the entire wave that was besieging his ship. This causes a rain of blood, and amidst the cheers of his crew, Clark tells them that they are getting in his way. So the crew orders a retreat to give him space, and although he says he wants to keep playing, he admits he has to finish there because the wave is endless. With a rope tied to his harpoon, he throws it in the air, pierces a monster, and manages to catch a lightning bolt, which descends along the rope and chars the wave of monsters. This surprises everyone, even the protagonist, who says his movements were perfect and he wasn't bragging. The lightning starts to strike the battlefield, hitting ships and monsters alike. As a result, the monsters finally retreat, and the humans get a break, which they use to correct their course. The next morning, the fleet makes repairs and the damage assessment report is presented. They lost 7 ships and another 5 left the formation. So in a single battle, they lost 30% of their combat strength. People begin to panic because if they encountered this number, they don't know how many there will be in the nest. And they say that at this rate, there's no possibility of winning. They even suggest returning to New York to reorganize, an opinion that gains traction among the attendees. The protagonist wonders if they will be able to win the war if everyone is terrified, because he's not sure if he himself could have continued if the harpooner he tried to save and died had been Kana. But then the girl asks them if they got into this war without knowing what they were up against, because there are people waiting and counting on them whom they have to protect. Clark thinks that will only worsen the fear of those who are scared. And Kana continues, saying that the explosion is near, so they have no time to waste even if it costs them their lives. This leaves the audience speechless and hesitant. Clark thinks they are too selfish to accept sacrificing their lives for others. But he won't leave, as the hunt will provide him with enjoyment like nothing else in the world. And he finally says that the casualties are according to the plan, as they only estimated that 20% would come back alive. So he says that those who decide to flee won't be able to set foot in any human base again. All with the aim of creating a reason that overcomes fear. And he concludes by saying they must fight, because even if they die, their families will survive no matter what. Which convinces the harpooners when suddenly someone arrives saying they found an island, which is constructed, and they decide to approach it, as they need a place to make repairs anyway. And Clark says it doesn't matter if it's an island or a nest, they just have to destroy it. This makes the protagonist think that the harpooner is a demon and Kana an angel, both coexisting on the same ship, as they approach the island. As they get closer, they realize they are containers and it's not an island, but a heap of floating garbage. They even find a boy from New York that was lost during a storm. Now supposes that all the lost garbage ended up forming an island, but then they discover that everything is tied together with ropes to keep it from separating. And they suspect that people lived or still live there. That's when Sonya sees a little girl observing them, and the protagonist thinks she looks a lot like Lita, now calls her, but she runs away scared, so the protagonist and the harpooner chase her. And when they catch up to her, they tell her that they are not bad people, but Mao's smile scares her, so she runs away again, and the protagonist follows her again, telling her not to be afraid. But when she climbs onto a container, she encounters some elderly people who point pieces of metal at her, and they tell her to leave as there's nothing valuable on a garbage island. But then Kana explains who they are and where they come from, and that they just need to stop there to repair their ships. So, after seeing the fleet, the leader understands that they are safe and tells everyone they can come out now. So the entire community of elderly people starts emerging from the garbage, and they thank them for taking care of the Leviathans, saying that all their young ones died during the battle against the monsters, and they offer to help them. Then the chief tells them they are in Kraken's territory, and Clark sees a good opportunity to hunt it using the elderly people as bait. They provide them with food and help with the repairs. The girl also wants to help, but they don't let her, and the protagonist thinks she's very cute. Then one of the harpooners mentions her name, and the girl seems to recognize it. She asks him if he's a harpooner and if he fights the sea monsters. He responds with a yes. She asks him why he does it if he could die, and he tells her it's to protect people. So the girl tells him she wants to protect him. And after thanking him, the protagonist tells her that he still has someone he needs to protect, thinking of his sister. But suddenly the girl tells him she knows he's talking about Lita. This scares the protagonist, who asks how she knows that. But she replies that it's him and Lita whom she wants to protect, as the owner of that pendant told her to. And when she looks at it, she sees that inside it holds pictures of his parents, so she asks who it is. The elderly finish distributing the food, but then the chief opens a door, revealing mercenaries and tied up people, and he tells them that it will start in 30 minutes. Then we see that all the harpooners fell asleep, and the pirates come out of hiding discreetly. One of the fleet members remains awake, but they kill him, and the chief orders to kill the awake ones and capture the sleeping ones to use them as bait and food. He says that Union Busan, humanity's largest ark, now belongs to the pirates. They board the city ship and kill everyone they find awake, even some who are asleep just for fun. But then they encounter Kana, who is still awake, and they think she'll be an easy prey because she's a girl. But before they finish saying it, the harpooner leaps and shreds them to pieces, so the rest recognize her as the harpooner who killed Genod. She falls in the midst of them and wreaks havoc. The pirate leader takes a group to deal with those who are sleeping on the island. But when they enter, they find that their entire group is awake, since they didn't eat what was offered to them. And before they can shoot them, they are sent flying by the man, and then stripped by the girl. One of the pirates tries to throw a grenade, but the girl fixes it to his hand, and it explodes, killing the pirates. Then she communicates it to the fleet, so they tell the protagonist to throw the girl overboard. He asks her if she was with them, but she tells him no, that she was just observing, as she wanted to understand why humans fight and kill each other. And she says that the protagonist also wants a kingdom and a queen, and then reveals that she devoured his mother. And that's how the 6th part of this manhwa ends. If you have made it this far in the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to get here, so comment the word Leviathan in the comments. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.